A long time ago, in the peaceful village of Uguta, there lived a young man named Ikenna. He was not just any man. He was handsome, with smooth dark skin, sharp eyes, and a strong body from years of fishing. Many young women in the village admired him, but Ikenna cared more about success than love. The village of Uguta was surrounded by thick forests and wide rivers. Life there was simple. People farmed, fished, and told stories by the fire at night. But there was one place no one dared to go, the forbidden river, Mythology. The elders warned everyone about this river. They said it was cursed, that anyone who entered its waters never returned. The river is home to Adaku, the golden mermaid, the oldest man in the village, Panaji, would say. She is not like the fish we eat. She is not like the water spirits we pray to. She is evil. The people believed him. Parents warned their children. Fishermen never let their boats drift too close. But Ikenna, with his good looks and bold spirit, refused to listen. "This is just an old story," he told his friend Obina one evening. "I have fished in many rivers, and nothing has ever happened to me. If the best fish are in Mythology, why should I be afraid?" Obina shook his head. "Ikenna, the elders do not lie. Leave that river alone." But Ikenna was stubborn. Every night, when no one was watching, he took his fishing net and walked to the forbidden river. And every night, he caught more fish than anyone else in the village. With time, people started to notice that Ikenna always had the biggest fish. "Ikenna, where do you fish?" they asked. He smiled and lied. "Ah, just the usual places." But deep inside, he felt powerful. He had gone to the forbidden river and nothing had happened to him. The elders were wrong. One evening, as the sun set over Uguta, Ikenna made a bold decision. "Tonight, I will catch the biggest fish of my life," he whispered to himself. The day was bright and busy in Uguta. It was market day, and the villagers filled the square, selling yams, fish, and colorful fabrics. Women carried baskets on their heads, children ran around laughing, and traders shouted their prices. But Ikenna was not in the market. He had a different plan. As the sun began to set, he walked quietly to the forbidden river, Mythology. His fishing net rested on his shoulder, and his heart pounded with excitement. "Tonight I will catch the biggest fish of my life," he thought again, stepping closer to the dark waters. The river was silent. No birds chirped, no frogs croaked. The air felt heavier than usual, but Ikenna did not care. He cast his net. For a few moments nothing happened. Then, a sharp tug. Ikenna's heart leaped. Something was caught in his net. He gripped the rope tightly and began to pull. But the weight was too heavy. He pulled harder. The river's surface began to glow yellow. Ikenna's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen anything like this before. The glow grew brighter and brighter, lighting up the dark waters like the midday sun. Finally, with one last pull, he lifted his catch out of the river. His eyes widened in shock. It was not a fish. It was a mermaid. Her skin shimmered like gold, her long black hair floated around her face, and her eyes, her piercing yellow eyes, stared directly into his. She was tangled in his net, but she did not struggle. For a brief moment, everything was still. The world seemed to pause. Then, her eyes blinked. Before Ikenna could react, the mermaid reached out and grabbed his wrist. The touch burned like fire and ice at the same time. Then, with a sudden, powerful pull, she dragged him into the water. Ikenna's lungs burned as he plunged into the river. The cold water swallowed him whole, and his vision blurred. He struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the mermaid's grip was strong. Down, down, down they went. The world around him changed. The river, once dark and endless, opened into a vast, glowing underwater kingdom. Strange, colorful lights shimmered around him. Schools of silver fish swam past, moving like clouds in the deep. The sand beneath him sparkled like gold dust, and massive coral towers stretched toward the surface. Then, darkness. When Ikenna woke up, he was inside a cave. The air was damp, and the floor was covered in shallow water, cool against his skin. His clothes were wet,
His head throbbed and his heart pounded with fear. He sat up quickly, but something moved in front of him. It was her, the golden mermaid. She smiled at him, her sharp yellow eyes filled with something he did not understand. "You are finally awake, my love," she said, her voice as smooth as flowing water. Ikenna's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he demanded. The mermaid tilted her head. "I am Adaku, queen of the deep, and you are mine now." Ikenna shook his head. No, I have to go back." Adaku's smile did not fade. "I have waited for centuries to have a man," she said, floating closer to him. "And now, I finally do." She lifted a hand, and the water in the cave rose in response. It danced around her fingers like it was alive. Ikenna felt a strange force wrap around his body, holding him in place. He was trapped. The days turned into weeks. Adaku treated Ikenna like a prized possession. She brought him the finest sea fruits, spoke to him about the ancient waters, and made sure he never left her sight and was ready to satisfy her whenever she needed him. At first he fought. He refused to eat. He refused to talk. He sat in silence, staring at the cave walls. But time wore him down. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Slowly, Ikenna began to lose hope. He was a prisoner in a world not meant for him, satisfying the sexual desires of a beautiful mermaid. One day, Adaku left the cave. Ikenna didn't know where she had gone, but for the first time in months, he was alone. His heart pounded. This is my chance. Moving quickly, he waded through the shallow water, searching for a way out. He found a small opening at the back of the cave, a place where the water was darker and colder. He took a deep breath and swam. Faster than ever before, he pushed through the deep, his arms cutting through the water. His lungs burned, his muscles ached, but he kept going. Then, light. A soft glow appeared above him, the surface. With a final push, Ikenna burst out of the water, gasping for air. He had done it. He was free. Ikenna stumbled into Ugwuta after months of being missing. His clothes were torn, his body was weak, and his face looked different. Haunted. The moment the villagers saw him, everything stopped. Women fetching water dropped their pots. Children stared in shock. The men, who had long assumed he was dead, gathered around him. "Ikenna!" his friend Obina gasped. "Is it really you?" More people surrounded him, whispering in disbelief. "We thought you were dead," one woman cried. "No one returns from Amiri Oju." Pa Naji, the oldest man in the village, stepped forward, his eyes heavy with knowledge. "Tell us, my son," he said. "Did you see her?" Ikenna swallowed hard. He knew who the elder meant. Adaku. "Yes," he said at last. "I saw her." A wave of fear spread through the crowd. Some of the elders muttered prayers under their breath. The younger men looked at Ikenna with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Pa Naji nodded slowly. "Then you must pray that she does not come for you." Ikenna shivered, but he was home now. It was over. Wasn't it? Days passed, then weeks. Ikenna tried to return to his old life. He avoided the forbidden river, choosing instead to fish in the safer waters. At first, things seemed normal. He laughed with Obina. He ate with the villagers. He tried to forget the feeling of water pulling him under. But at night, he could not sleep. The river whispered to him. Sometimes, in the quiet of dawn, he heard something else. A soft, haunting song floating through the air. And then one evening, a storm rolled in from the river. And the villagers huddled inside their huts, whispering prayers. They didn't know what was happening, but the elders suspected that the river had come for Ikenna. And he heard it. Through the howling wind, a song drifted through the air, soft, haunting, and impossible to ignore. "Ikenna, my love, come to me." His body froze. His heart pounded. His feet moved on their own. He tried to resist, but the song wrapped around his mind like a rope, pulling him toward the riverbank. His steps were slow, unsteady, like he was in a dream. The golden glow of Adaku shimmered through the rain. And in her arms, wrapped in a cloth made of river pearls, was a baby girl. Ikena's breath caught in his throat. "She is yours, Ikena," Adaku whispered, her voice full of something he could not understand. The baby stirred, her tiny fists clenching. When she opened her eyes, Ikena stumbled back in shock. Her eyes were not like normal babies. They were golden, just like her mother's. Ikena stared at the child, his mind racing. This was his daughter, his blood. He reached out, his hands shaking, and touched her soft skin. A sudden shout broke through the air. "Witch! She has returned!" Ikena's head snapped up. A villager had seen everything. The alarm spread like wildfire, and soon the people of Oguta gathered with weapons in their hands. The sight of Adaku and the baby filled the villagers with fear and rage. "She will curse us!" a woman cried. "She has bewitched Ikena again," a man shouted. Panaji stepped forward, his face grim. "She is dangerous. We must end this now." Ikena stepped in front of Adaku, his arms outstretched. "No, leave her alone." But they did not listen. With a cry of fury, the villagers charged forward. Adaku's eyes flashed with fear as the first spear pierced her side. She let out a sharp pain scream. Another spear struck her chest, then another. Her golden body trembled, her hands clutching at the wounds. "Ikena, protect her," she whispered, falling to her knees. Then she collapsed. The river let out a deep, mournful roar, and for the first time the villagers felt true fear. The golden glow in Adaku's body dimmed. The rain slowed, the storm stilled. Adaku was gone. The golden mermaid of Amiri Oju was dead. The villagers turned to the baby. "She must die too," someone shouted. Ikena held Amaka closer, his heart pounding. "She is just a child," he yelled. "She is a child of the river," another voice screamed. "She will bring destruction." The crowd moved forward, their hands gripping spears and machetes. Ikena knew what would happen if he stayed. So he did the only thing he could. He ran. With Amaka held tightly in his arms, he ran into the night, leaving the village of Oguta behind forever. Ikena ran for hours, his legs aching, his breath ragged. The crying baby in his arms was the only thing that kept him going. He did not stop until he was far, far away from Oguta, where no one knew his name. By the time dawn broke, he had reached another village, Ukabuo, a quiet place surrounded by thick forests and a peaceful river. Exhausted, hungry, and desperate, Ikena fell to his knees, clutching his baby to his chest. "Please," he begged the gods, "let me keep her safe." And so, in Ukabuo, he started a new life. Ikena never spoke of Oguta. He never spoke of Adaku. He became a simple fisherman once more, living in a small hut at the edge of the village. And there he raised Amaka, his daughter, his only family. He never told her the truth. When she was old enough to ask about her mother, he simply said, "Your mother died giving birth to you." That was all. No stories, no past, no river. To everyone in Ukabuo, Amaka was just Ikena's daughter, a girl without a mother. But even in hiding, some things could not be erased. As Amaka grew, she became stunningly beautiful. Her skin was smooth like river stones. Her hair was thick and dark with beautiful waves that curled like the water. She had a quiet grace that made people stop and stare. But it was her eyes that made her unforgettable. They were golden, shining like sunlight on water. People in Ukabuo whispered about them. "She is different," some women would say. Her mother must have been a spirit, others murmured. But no one questioned Ikena. He was a quiet man, respected for his hard work. And so Amaka lived in peace, unaware of the truth about herself. But secrets do not stay buried forever. The sun had barely risen over Ukabuo when Amaka was awakened by something strange. At first, she thought it was a dream, soft, mystical music floating through the air. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before. The melody was gentle, yet powerful, like waves crashing onto the shore. It pulled at something deep inside her, something she didn't understand. She sat up, listening. The village was still. The birds chirped, the trees rustled, and the people moved about their morning chores. But no one else reacted to the music. No one else could hear it. Her heart pounded. What is this? She rose to her feet, barefoot and curious, and walked in the direction of the sound. It led her through the village, past the market, past the fields, and toward the edge of a large river, one she had never been to before. The closer she got, the louder the music became. Then, a voice behind her. "Amaka, where are you going?" She turned to see Ifunanya, a teenage girl from the village. Ifunanya was tall and lively, with deep brown eyes full of curiosity. She was always asking questions, always looking for adventure. "Why are you staring at the river like that?" Ifunanya asked. Amaka blinked. She hadn't even realized she was standing at the water's edge now, her toes almost touching the surface. "Do you hear that?" Amaka asked. Ifunanya frowned. "Hear what?" Amaka hesitated. "The music." Ifunanya laughed. "Amaka, I think the sun is playing tricks on you. There is no music." Amaka frowned. How could she not hear it? It was so loud, so clear. But before she could say anything else, something splashed in the water. Ifunanya gasped and took a step back. Then, a hand shot out from the river. The hand grabbed Ifunanya's ankle. She screamed. Before Amaka could react, Ifunanya was yanked underwater. The water rippled violently, swallowing her whole. "Ifunanya!" Amaka cried out, dropping to her knees. She reached into the water, but her friend was gone. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a golden glow appeared beneath the surface. And Amaka felt it, the pull. The same pull she had felt when she heard the music. The same pull that made her heart race. Something inside her told her to follow. So she took a deep breath and jumped in. The moment Amaka plunged into the water, her world transformed. She expected to feel the familiar sting of river water in her nose, the tightness in her chest, the desperate need to swim back up for air. But none of that happened. Instead, she could breathe. The water around her felt light, almost like air, and her body moved effortlessly as if she belonged there. But she had no time to wonder. Ahead of her, she saw Ifunanya struggling. Two strong mermen were dragging her deeper into the river. Their blue-scaled arms gripped her tightly, their eyes glowing like moonlight on water. Ifunanya thrashed and kicked, bubbles of panic escaping from her lips. Amaka's heart pounded. She had to do something. With powerful strokes that felt unnaturally easy, she swam after them. Faster. Faster than she had ever swum before. She reached out, grabbing one of the mermen's arms. "Let her go!" she shouted. The merman turned his head sharply, his piercing silver eyes narrowing at her. For a moment, he looked shocked. Then, in one swift movement, he let go of Ifunanya and grabbed Amaka instead. Her world spun. Darkness swallowed them both as they sank deeper into the unknown. When Amaka opened her eyes, she saw a world unlike anything she had ever imagined. Massive coral towers glowed with soft golden light. Strange, colorful fish darted between walls of seaweed. The ground beneath her was not sand, but a shimmering, pearly surface. And in front of her, merfolk. Hundreds of them. Mermaids with flowing silver hair, mermen with scales as dark as midnight, their tails long and powerful, curling behind them as they floated in the water. And at the center of them all, a throne carved from the bones of giant sea creatures. Sitting upon it was a two-tailed merman, his skin dark and sleek, his eyes cold and sharp like a blade, the Merman King. Amaka tried to move, but her hands and feet were tied with golden seaweed. She looked to her side. Ifunanya was tied up too, her face frozen in terror. The king's voice was deep, like a wave crashing against stone. "What is this?" he asked, his sharp eyes locking onto Amaka. One of the guards bowed. "A human girl. She followed us into the river, but there is something strange about her." The king narrowed his gaze. He studied Amaka for a long moment. Then his expression darkened. He rose from his throne, his massive tail coiling around the base of the seat. "We cannot allow her to live." His eyes flickered toward the guards. "Prepare the sacrifice." Amaka felt her blood run cold as the guards dragged her and Ifunanya toward a massive stone altar at the edge of the kingdom. In front of them was a giant dark cave, its entrance swirling with shadows. And then it moved. A deep, thunderous growl echoed from the cave, and out of the darkness swam the largest fish Amaka had ever seen. It was as long as a house, its mouth lined with rows of jagged teeth, its eyes like glowing yellow orbs. It was a beast, a monster, and it was hungry. Amaka struggled against her bindings, panic gripping her chest. "Let us go!" Ifunanya screamed. The guards ignored her. They lifted both girls onto the altar, the water around them trembling as the beast swam closer. "This is the price for our safety," the king said coldly. "A gift to the depths." The giant fish opened its mouth, revealing a tunnel of endless darkness. The guards moved to push them forward. Amaka's heart hammered. And just as she felt herself falling into the monster's jaws, something deep inside her awoke. Amaka and Ifunanya screamed as the merfolk shoved them forward, their bound bodies tumbling straight into the gaping mouth of the giant fish. The world around them turned pitch black as the beast's jaws slammed shut, trapping them inside. Ifunanya sobbed, struggling against her restraints. "Amaka, we're going to die!" Amaka fought against the ropes binding her wrists, her heart racing. She wouldn't die like this. She couldn't. Then, it happened. Her wrist scraped against the creature's massive teeth, and a single drop of her blood touched its jagged fangs. The reaction was instant. The fish let out a deafening scream, a sound so powerful that the water around them shook like an earthquake. It thrashed violently, its massive body twisting and rolling, as if it were in unbearable pain. The merfolk outside the cave stared in horror, their eyes wide with shock. Never before had the sacred beast reacted this way. Inside the fish, the walls trembled, its muscles tightening as though it were rejecting something. And then it spat them out. Amaka and Ifunanya were flung through the water like pebbles in a storm, the force of the fish's rejection sending them far, far away. They tumbled through the currents, the waves tossing them about until they hit the shore. Amaka gasped as she felt solid ground beneath her. She coughed up water, her lungs burning, her body aching. Beside her, Ifunanya lay motionless, her chest rising and falling weakly. Amaka's hands trembled as she reached for her friend. "Ifunanya." Ifunanya groaned softly, blinking up at the sky. "Are we dead?" Amaka looked around. The river stretched behind them, its waters now calm, as if nothing had ever happened. The land before them was strange, a place neither of them recognized. But it was land, and they were alive. Ifunanya let out a weak laugh. "That stupid fish spit us out." Amaka didn't laugh. She stared at her bleeding wrist, the wound that had somehow saved their lives. "What am I?" The answer she knew was waiting for her in the past. And the past was waiting at the village she had never seen before, the place her father had run from years ago. The sun was beginning to set as Amaka and Ifunanya wandered into a small village, hungry, weak, and lost. Their clothes were still damp, their bodies aching from the journey. They had no idea where they were, only that they had escaped something terrible. The villagers noticed them immediately. A few women carrying water pots paused to stare. A group of men sharpening machetes under a tree narrowed their eyes. Children whispered among themselves. Ifunanya leaned toward Amaka. "Maybe we should keep walking." But before they could turn back, an old woman stepped forward. She had deep wrinkles, sharp eyes, and a presence that commanded respect. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice neither kind nor hostile. Amaka hesitated. "My name is Amaka," she said finally. "This is my friend, Ifunanya. We are travelers. We need shelter." The old woman studied them for a moment before nodding. "You may stay," she said, pointing toward a small hut. "Rest first. We will talk later." Grateful, Amaka and Ifunanya followed her inside. unaware that they had just walked into Ugwuta, the village where Amaka's mother had been killed. Later that night, unable to sleep, Amaka felt drawn to the sound of water. It called to her, just like before. Silently, she slipped out of the hut, her bare feet moving toward the riverbank, where the water glistened under the moonlight. Ifunanya, noticing her absence, followed behind. "Amaka," she whispered, "where are you going?" Amaka didn't answer. She stepped closer to the water, her heartbeat thundering in her ears, and then she knelt down and touched the river. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, a golden glow spread across her skin. A strange warmth filled her veins. Then, in an instant, her legs vanished. Ifunanya gasped. Where Amaka's feet had once been, a shimmering golden tail now flicked in the water. Amaka screamed. She tried to stand, but her legs were gone. Her reflection in the water stared back at her own face, but no longer human. "Amaka!" Ifunanya stumbled backward in horror. You're a mermaid." Suddenly, shouts rang through the village. Someone had seen. The villagers, armed with spears and torches, rushed toward the river, their faces twisted in fear and anger. "She is the daughter of the Golden Witch," someone shouted. "She is cursed!" Before Amaka could react, strong hands grabbed her. Ifunanya screamed as they were dragged away, their arms bound. The villagers had captured them, and Amaka was about to learn the truth of who she really was. The villagers dragged Amaka and Ifunanya through the dirt, their torches lighting up the night. Their faces were filled with fear, anger, and something worse: hatred. The entire village gathered in the square, surrounding them. The elders stood at the front, their expressions grim. "Let the human girl go," one of the elders commanded, pointing at Ifunanya. "She is not the one we want." The villagers hesitated, but then they untied Ifunanya's hands and shoved her aside. Ifunanya stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. "No, you can't do this. She didn't do anything wrong." But no one listened. The moment Ifunanya was freed, all eyes turned to Amaka. Bound, unable to move, her golden eyes burned with confusion and fear. Then the oldest elder stepped forward, Naji, the very man who had once led the attack against her mother. His wrinkled face twisted in anger as he pointed a shaking finger at her. "I know who you are." A hush fell over the crowd. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Years ago, a golden mermaid came to this village and tried to take one of our men. We killed her to protect ourselves." His cold eyes locked onto Amaka. "And now you have returned. You are her daughter." The villagers gasped in horror. "The cursed child of the river," someone shouted. "She will bring destruction upon us. Kill her before she destroys us all." Amaka's heart pounded. She finally understood. This was the village her father had fled from. She had returned to a place that hated her very existence. She clenched her fists, rage bubbling inside her. Naji raised his hand, signaling the villagers to strike her down. But before anyone could touch her, Amaka let out a scream. It was not a normal scream. It was a sound that came from the deepest part of her soul, from the river itself. It was the scream of the sea. The ground shook violently. The air rippled with unseen power. And then, the river answered. A massive wave of water exploded from the riverbank, surging into the village, knocking villagers off their feet. The villagers screamed in terror as water flooded the square, twisting into towering shapes. And then, through the mist and rising water, they came. The merfolk. Mermaids and mermen emerged from the river, their golden eyes burning with fury. They moved swiftly, their tails glistening under the torchlight, their hands raised as water rose with their power. They had come for Amaka. Before Amaka could understand what was happening, she felt something wrap around her. Not hands, water itself. It lifted her gently, pulling her toward the river. "No!" Ifunanya rushed forward, but the water held her back. Amaka's vision blurred as the merfolk surrounded her, their voices whispering in an ancient language. She was one of them, and they had come to take her home. Far away, Ikenna stood at the edge of the forest, gasping for breath. He had been searching for Amaka for days, his heart heavy with fear. Then suddenly, he heard her scream. His blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. It was his daughter. Without thinking, he ran toward the village, his feet pounding against the ground. The night sky glowed with golden light. He saw the waves rising in the distance, the river twisting like it was alive. And at the center of it all, he saw her. His Amaka, his daughter, being pulled into the depths. "Amaka!" he screamed. Ikenna ran into Oguta, his chest heaving, his heart pounding like a war drum. He had seen Amaka disappear into the river, her golden body swallowed by the rising waves. But before he could reach the water, rough hands grabbed him. The villagers had turned on him. "You brought this upon us!" someone shouted, dragging him to the ground. "He is the father of the cursed child!" An abomination of a man, he fell in love with a mermaid and had a cursed child. Ikenna struggled, but they were too many. Ropes bound his hands and spears pointed at his chest. "We will not fight alone," Naji declared. "We will call on the warriors of Iduka village. They will help us destroy the merfolk once and for all." The villagers cheered, their eyes filled with hatred. Ikenna's heart sank. A war was coming, and his daughter was in the middle of it. Beneath the water, Amaka opened her eyes. She was surrounded by mermaids and mermen, their bodies glowing under the deep blue of the ocean. They moved around her like shadows, their eyes filled with recognition, wonder, and respect. One of them, a tall, elegant mermaid with silver hair, swam closer. "You are golden," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Amaka frowned. "What does that mean?" The mermaid smiled. "Only the royal bloodline of merfolk is golden," she explained. "You are a daughter of the sea, born from a sacred bond. You summoned us." Amaka gasped. "I summoned you?" "Yes," another merman said. "With a single scream, you called upon the power of the ocean itself." Amaka felt something stir inside her, a deep, ancient energy she had never known before. "I can feel the river, the sea, everything." The silver-haired mermaid nodded. "And there is more. As royal blood, you can also communicate with those you love, no matter where they are." Amaka's eyes widened. "My father." She closed her eyes, reaching out, searching for him. And suddenly, she felt him. His pain, his fear, his heart beating wildly in his chest. He was in danger. Amaka's eyes snapped open. "I have to go." The merfolk bowed their heads. "You are always welcome here, Princess of the Deep," the silver-haired mermaid said. Amaka nodded. "Thank you." Then, with a single powerful stroke of her tail, she swam toward the surface. Toward her father. Toward war. When Amaka rose from the water, the village was in chaos. The people of Oguta had gathered, and warriors from Iduka had arrived, armed with spears, machetes, and fire. And in the center of it all, her father knelt, tied up, surrounded by men with weapons. Amaka's heart twisted in fear and fury. The villagers turned, their faces dark with rage. "She has returned. The water demon. She destroyed our village with her cursed powers." Naji stepped forward, his eyes filled with hate. "Surrender yourself and the merfolk and we will let your father live," he declared. Amaka's hands trembled. "No, Amaka," Ikenna shouted. "Don't do it. You don't belong here. You are special. You are more than this." Tears burned in Amaka's golden eyes. "I love you, my daughter," Ikenna whispered. "I have always loved you." Then, it happened. Naji pulled out a dagger. Without hesitation, without mercy, he slit Ikenna's throat. Blood poured onto the ground. Amaka screamed. Her father collapsed, his eyes open, his lips still curved in love. Her world shattered, and rage consumed her. The ground trembled. The sky darkened. The river roared. Amaka's golden eyes burned as she raised her hands toward the sky. And then, the water came. A massive tidal wave surged from the river, taller than the tallest trees, wider than the village itself. The villagers screamed in terror. Some ran, some begged for mercy, but Amaka's heart was numb. She had lost everything. She had nothing left to save. And so, with one final scream, she let the wave crash down. Water swallowed Ogwuta whole, every hut, every fire, every stone, and every life. The village vanished beneath the flood, only the river remained. Still, endless,
Haunted. The village of Ogwuta was gone. The land that once held homes, laughter, and fire was now silent, buried beneath the endless river. The water stretched as far as the eye could see, calm and still, yet beneath its surface, it held the memories of the past, the spirits of the fallen, the wrath of a daughter who had lost everything, and the legend of the golden mermaid who had washed it all away. As the days passed, those who traveled near the river noticed something strange. The water had changed. One half of the river was dark and murky, heavy with sorrow, as if carrying the weight of all the souls that had perished. The other half was golden and clear, shimmering like sunlight, as if it held the spirit of something powerful, something eternal. But no matter how many years passed, no matter how many storms came, the two sides never mixed. Some whispered that the dark waters held the blood of the fallen, a curse upon those who had wronged the daughter of the sea. Others believed the golden waters held Amaka herself, her spirit forever guarding the land, watching, waiting. But no one ever saw her again. No one knew where she had gone. She had vanished into the river, leaving behind only her legend.
Some say she returned to the sea, where her people welcomed her as the lost princess she was meant to be. Others say she wandered the world alone, neither human nor mermaid, forever searching for a place to belong. But one thing was certain, the river was hers now. A place where no man would ever fish again. A place where her story would never be forgotten. And when the wind whispered through the trees at night, carrying the soft melody of a song only few could hear, travelers stopped and listened. Because in that haunting melody, in the voice of the water itself, they heard her name, Amaka, the golden mermaid, the daughter of the river, the one who had returned and had never truly left.